All right. And welcome back, you guys, to the Self-Selecting Podcast. I am your host, Corey Hagman. Thank you for being here. Thank you for tuning in. Real quick, those of you who have liked, commented, reviewed the show, no matter what platform you're on, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, those of you who are subscribed to the YouTube channel, getting those exclusive medium kind of short-ish form videos I'm posting bi-weekly, new format, what up? Thank you. Thank you for supporting me, supporting the creation of these videos, supporting me sitting down like a complete psychopath and talking to myself in an empty room hours on end. I appreciate you. That is why I'm doing this. I have had a pretty packed day thus far, recorded with Evan Wells, Paul Revelia. So today has been pretty packed for me. Recorded this morning for the Pro Physique podcast. Really appreciative to have the opportunity to come on and be a guest. In that episode, we talked a lot about PEDs, and it was a really nice like round table type format. So if you haven't checked that out, go take a listen. I also brought on 2 guests this morning. Now I'm ending the day with some solo episodes, and we're talking about something that I hold very near and dear to my heart, and that is body fat percentage, how to measure it, the problems, the challenges that come with measuring body fat percentage, and why you should or shouldn't consider this when deciding, what metrics you want to use in order to make decisions around your fat loss phase. So why is this an important topic to me? I was that individual when I started in the bodybuilding space. When I started getting ready for my first show, I became very obsessed with the idea of getting leaner and leaner and seeing different numbers come up across different methods in which we measure body fat. This was back 2014, 2015, and I had a DEXA done. I did the BOD POD. I didn't do the Hydrostatic one, which I'm going to explain what that is next. And I had Calipers done. I had all of these things done kind of within the same time frame before, I forget if it was my first show or my second show, but at this time it was like a 6-week gap. Doesn't really matter. And I loved this idea that we could kind of narrow down and quantify the amount of body fat as opposed to lean body mass or fat-free mass that I had at the time. And I felt like really from a competition sense, like this would be helpful in understanding how much body fat I needed to lose. And this is typically why the catalyst behind people wanting to get body fat measurements done, period, is they want to know where they currently are. And even though hardly anyone ever comes right out and says this, they want to make comparisons. They want to compare someone that they heard was 9% or 11% or 15% or 20%. And it's not to say that that's the case 100% of the time, but I will say in my scope, in my world, very much it's because someone feels like a specific metric is indicative of a certain status, a certain value, or predictive of a certain outcome. In the case of competition, no, I'm leaner, so that means I'm going to place better. Now, in this episode, in this hour-long solo episode, we're going to cover why measure body fat percentage at all when it can be helpful. The main methods, so DEXA, BOD POD, hydrostatic weighing, calipers, BIA, and MRI. I am going to tell you up front, there are pros and cons to, all of these, but I do want to put a special focus on the DEXA's abilities to determine your resting metabolic rate, as well as the potential case use for calipers as reference points, specifically for individuals who are trying to achieve, extreme body fat levels. I want to be very candid. There are blind spots with all of these metrics, and there are factors that are going to influence accuracy in the actual number. But hopefully by the end of this, it will make sense. You'll have a clearer idea of what method would probably make the most sense for you, how to build a consistent routine with going about getting these getting these methods performed. Yeah, so hopefully that's what you walk away with. And I hope you don't walk away feeling dumber or less informed. That ultimately is the bottom line. Smarter, more informed, better able to make decisions. So, and real quick, I do want to say there's a lot of people who will take one metric and weigh it against a different metric, whether that be DEXA versus Calipers versus BOD POD versus BIA. And you kind of wonder like which is correct. And hopefully through the application of all this information I'm going to go over, hopefully you're able to discern why there could be discrepancies, even if you get multiple, or even if you use multiple methods in tracking body fat. So why are we concerned with body fat percentage at all? Now, this is something that I think, for the prep, the competitor, and really just the individual who for a long time has been hyper-focused on seeing physique changes, body composition doesn't always translate to scale weight. And there was probably this shift, I want to say like 10, 15 years ago, where it became normal. And it was really even something that I encouraged is hey, ladies, we got to stop being afraid of gaining any weight whatsoever. You actually will probably look better if you gain a little bit of weight, assuming that is good quality weight. Now, the scale can't really differentiate between fat mass and lean mass. Body fat percentage essentially deciphers what percentage of the weight that you are, clocking in at, is more costly. So that would be muscle, and what percentage is fat, is adiposity, is in a lot of cases necessary and needed for reproductive function, but also needed for a slew of other functions. But it can essentially assign a value to this amount, a total sum, if you will. Now, what about in the case that we are using body fat percentage to determine health status? We already know that excess body fat, that is going to correlate with a higher disease risk. Also, if you are, let's say, a female who's looking to get into the sport of bodybuilding, and roughly the weight or the body fat percentage in which you begin to see dysfunction hormonally, you can kind of project whether or not you're going to pigeonhole yourself into that hormonal environment. It'll give you a better sense of whether or not you have enough muscle, whether you need to spend more time off stage. I think collectively body fat, it can be more revealing than just scale weight, especially when we're talking about individuals who are going to require more muscularity. So in the case, a competitor or just an individual who doesn't necessarily want to be low body fat and low muscle mass. Now, I think for a lot of people, it does come down to seeing that percentage go down week and week, week after week, bi-weekly, monthly. I think it's a great source of motivation for a lot of people. But it can also be eye-opening in the case that you're not seeing progress. This actually happened to me. I was week 4/5. I started getting sick, got on some antibiotics. I was also I think because the antibiotics, I wasn't using the bathroom nearly as much as I normally would. And I was very inconsistent. I also hadn't had a period for about a month. So I wasn't really certain where I was hormonally. And this kind of presented as, okay, I know I'm adherent. I know I'm in a big enough deficit with the cardio and the step count, but I'm not seeing any scale weight come off day to day. But over the course of a week, I'm nothing's changing. And I waited 2 weeks, but I was gifted a DEXA scan by someone, and I was okay, you know what, this would actually be a really good metric to include here, because I've never gotten a DEXA weighing 147 pounds, which was the weight that I had the DEXA done when I was. So I was realistically, I can get a better idea of how much lean mass I actually have. And from there, if we know that let's say 10% is too lean or 12% is too lean, then we kind of work backwards and think, okay, this is roughly the range I want to fall into. And this will tell me how much body fat essentially I have to lose in order to be stage lean, which still is going to have and encompass some body fat. So for me, this was actually really nice. I found that like it did highlight some discrepancies, some asymmetries, from the left leg to the right leg, left arm to the right arm, front to back. No, I don't think it actually did that, but I was able to get a better sense of just generally body composition. And that was nice. And don't worry, I am going to get into everything DEXA related, what I liked about it, what things could skew that result, here in a bit. But I think body fat percentage, I mean, like it can be helpful. The one thing I will say, and like the disclaimer is like, I know a lot of people, they get really bent out of shape when they're in a fat loss phase and they begin seeing these discrepancies in lean body mass based on the read. And that's one of like the larger blind spots that I'm going to unpack today and that I think you need to be aware of. There are times when we need to go off the objective data, and then there are times when the objective data is not telling the full story. And that can very much be the case for some of us. So different ways that we can measure body fat. I already kind of alluded to DEXA. That's the one that I've gotten recently. Historically, I've had this done about 4 years ago when I was getting ready for a show, but I was much, much heavier. I was 135, but like getting on stage to compete in both bikini and wellness. So it was cool being able to compare, because like in their database, they were able to pull those up and be like, oh, side by side, this is like, yeah, this is incredible. Here are the changes you've made in 4 years, even though it's not like it was a linear progression. So DEXA, it is a low dose X-ray, and it passes through your body to differentiate bone, fat, and lean mass in specific regions. So this is where it's really exciting for individuals who, let's say, need to add more muscle to like either the top or the bottom, and you want to maintain in the other group. If it's something that like your upper body's fully developed and like you don't need any more upper body, but you need to add a lot of tissue in the lower body, well, then you can keep an eye on the upper body while seeing the lower body progress, systematically. But oftentimes, people will say that this is the gold standard, that the accuracy is really high. Now, I'll say like, yes, like generally this is the one that I would say is probably more accurate compared to the other methods. There's typically a margin of error around 2%, even if conditions are constant. And really what I need you to like keep in mind is that the machine calibration can vary between facilities. So, I mean, like it might actually be more of a pain in the dick to be like, hey, can I use the same machine I used last time if like there's only 2 rooms? Let's say you book an appointment, because that's kind of what you have to do for DEXA is you have to book an appointment. They call you in, they're like, hey, which room do you want? Small day-to-day changes. If you do this fed, if you do it fasted, or if hydration status changes, if you don't go to the bathroom as much, if you are not retaining as much fluid, if you're not in true balance, like from an electrolyte standpoint. Doing it fasted is recommended for consistency. Doing it at the same time of day. I'll tell you, I have a client who like they go and do DEXAs after the same meal every day and the same amount of fluid and after a cardio session. And I very much wish they would just go like first thing on the way to the gym before eating. But truly, I would say like the big things here, like why this can be a benefit, is it does break down like body fat percentage to lean body mass by region. So that shows you exactly where muscle is being built, where fat is accruing or where it's dropping. And if you have issues in terms of past injuries, or if like you have imbalances, top to bottom, like I said before, you can quantify this in I would say a pretty accurate way. Now, many facilities, they're also going to give you a resting metabolic rate estimate. Keep in mind that this is truly like just an estimate. There's so many formulas you can use. And I think they give you 4 different ones that are like potentiations of your resting metabolic rate based on different formulas. Now, this can really help you dial in your nutrition. And I would say not necessarily in the case that like you want to go get a DEXA and then be told like here are the calories exactly to hit, but rather you can extrapolate that information and get a better sense of the kind of deficit that you're creating, which I think is very beneficial. I felt like mine was pretty accurate. Like it gave me a range at 147 at 5'4", 1,500 to 1,700. That works for me. I'm going to lean more towards the 1,500. I wouldn't go as far to say 1,700 is truly a like I would say like maybe that's closer to a maintenance, but I would be like kind of dicey about activity levels and how this is going to change day to day. I felt like Jordan's was really accurate too. He is really dense. He's like 190 pounds. And I mean, like we've seen in his body when he's been in a build, when he's been in a fat loss phase, it's been hard for him to gain weight, even at 3,500 calories, which is pretty much what we were able to see with the resting metabolic rate that the DEXA spit out, is that his like resting metabolic is anywhere from 2,500 to 3,000. So you layer that on top of like really high training performance and then just the recovery that's needed. I think it gives you a pretty accurate sense. Now, if budget or accessibility, if this is not an issue, I think DEXA could very well be something that you implement. I wouldn't necessarily say you need to do it weekly. I think data will get kind of muddied. And I would say specifically for females, we need to time this roughly the same time of our cycles. So if you are getting it done when you're ovulating, that's generally the time I would get it done the next month. If you're getting it done in the follicular versus the luteal, I think it's important to consider this, or even if you're on your period. So when I got mine done, I was 147, and I started my period after a missed month entirely. And just to be honest, like, sorry, I was really backed up. I hadn't gone to the bathroom even that morning. Like I was like, yeah, whatever, appointment's at 8, like not really a lot I can do at this point. Overnight, I started my period, was able to use the bathroom, and like my weight came down the next day. It was like 143.8. So keep in mind, like my DEXA was, it spit out 17% at 147. But is that truly accurate? Probably not 100%. It's hard to say. It's hard to say if it was equating for some of that GI weight or even fluid retention as fat or muscle. But I would say, like, generally, if you're noticing big swings the day before or the day after, it's not to say that that DEXA isn't useful or can't be helpful in just understanding your composition. But I would definitely make note of what variances or what aspects would potentially affect said weigh-in, and that should be included. Like, did you have a really big dinner the night before and maybe like your transit time is not as fast? Are you the week before your period and like naturally you just have that lower abdomen bloat and like things are a little more inflamed? Did you just have a crazy workout the day before? Which that was also another thing before the DEXA. Had a great workout that session, and some people are like, well, shouldn't you avoid training prior to getting it scanned? Prior to getting scanned, and realistically, like you can, but it's just like with labs. Like I generally don't want to impede on someone's training cycle, and if we can avoid that entirely, that's likely what I'm going to recommend they do, unless there is true reason, unless we're like using a DEXA for like osteopenia, or in the case we're getting labs done and we're like trying to look at liver enzymes in their most accurate sense. If they're slightly elevated, like I'm talking very marginal elevations, and we can correlate that, or I guess, yeah, make that correlation to training, that could explain some of it, but that's a different conversation. So now past that, you have the BOD POD, which is this like egg-shaped device that you get into. You sit in a sealed chamber and it measures how much air your body displaces. So this gives you body density, giving you body fat percentage. Now the accuracy is thought to be pretty good. I've seen in some individuals it does overestimate body fat if you're very muscular, because it's not perfect at differentiating densities. I think this is also the case for individuals who whose BMI is very high and their body fats are super high as well. Clothing, hair, that can skew results. So I mean, like I got like I don't even know, like 400 grams, maybe more than that, of extensions in my hair. This is a much different weight than my natural hair. You typically wear tight spandex or like minimal clothing, but let's say someone is wearing something a little bit thicker, someone's not as comfortable in like maybe a swimsuit. So in turn, that can skew things slightly. It's not as widely available as DEXA's though. And like I had access to it at Texas A&M. That's where I went to school. And I believe it was free for students, or if it was like a fee, it was very cheap. It was like 30, 40 bucks. So, I mean, like that could be something, but they also might make you be a student. They might require that you are a student. But in the case that it's not something that you have you have at your disposal, then like this could be problematic if you're trying to get multiple reads and kind of string them together to assess for patterns. But influencing like factors that can vary, kind of like with the DEXAs, like the machine needs to be calibrated appropriately. Even like keeping your posture still, like just being like still, quiet, big expansions of the chest, that can alter reading. So, I mean, like, these are all things that, like, to the degree in which they alter reading, how big of a deal is it? Well, like, largely we want to see something that's highly accurate. And if you can do this the same way each time, amazing. I mean, even with the DEXA, I remember like the way the girl told me to position, because you're like lying down, it's like this thing, it scans you, it's like 7 minutes, and she positioned me in a way that was very uncomfortable. Like I was kind of like arced off to the side, and like I remember on the body images itself, Jordan was like, Jesus, like, do you have scoliosis? And like I was like, no, like she told me to orient like this. Like it just felt very weird. And that's something we even kind of have to go back to, is like how the person administering the test, how they actually position you, whether or not with the BOD pod, for instance, they're like, hey, be really fucking quiet. Or they're like kind of joking with you and talking to you, whether or not you get really hot and you're like breathing a little deeper, breathing a little rapidly. Whether it makes that big of a difference, it's hard to say, but realistically with the BOD pod, I just don't see it being as accessible to most people. So that's where like comparing that side by side to the DEXA, great if you can compare those results, but especially for the individual that's more muscular and like getting closer to show, that would be kind of a headache if you oftentimes found that you were getting higher percentages with the BOD pod just from the fact that there's inaccuracies in the reading itself. Now, what about hydrostatic weighing, underwater weighing? In this one, you submerge yourself underwater, you exhale fully, and it measures water displacement. This gives you body density and body fat. Historically, this is considered extremely accurate, second to DEXA, but it does require you to exhale fully and stay underwater, which some might find uncomfortable or tough. It's oftentimes, I guess it's not really used as frequently now, and it's kind of overshadowed by DEXA's convenience. So Body Specs, the company I went through, it's affordable, and like also that was the other thing with BOD pod, is like if you don't have access to it, it could be a little more expensive, in addition to a longer commute there and from. But with the hydrostatic weighing, that's, I would say, even more rare and even harder to access. Like I looked it up for like the purpose of this video, and around me, and I live in Northern California, like, so like, the tech hub, and there were a few options and they weren't terrible in terms of price. It was $180 to $200, but the next one that they had was like end of April, and it was like an hour away. So I'm like, okay, that's not really feasible. Like, sure, if I planned that far in advance, but if this is something I wanted to get done like bi-weekly or every 3 to 4 weeks, and like past that, like I think it was like a private event too. So I'm like, okay, I have to go out of my way to like contact these people, see if like, I could get a slot, and like if it's a private event, are they even going to be able to fit me in? Do they already have all the slots like filled? So that's another consideration. It's not to deter you from hydrostatic or BOD pod, but just a matter of like, these are devices, and like, I mean, it could take a little bit of extra legwork to actually like be able to use them. And I would say if you have a connect at like a university or something, and this is something they offer, amazing. But that kind of brings me to the next one, which is skin fold sites, calipers. Now all this is pinching, like physically pinching subcutaneous fat at specific sites and plugging them into formulas. Now, I'm going to say I don't use the formulas. I just get the sum of the millimeters at different sites that I care about. So for me, I do calipers every single week. I've done them like for about 2 years, and not every single week, but like every check-in, like it's something that I take when I take my measurements, which is the circumference. I take my calipers, which I use an analog, like spring-loaded measurement tool, which I really like. I think it's much more accurate than using an electronic one where you have to like pinch it together. And I think this in itself is much more accurate than having a trained personal trainer, someone who is trained in doing calipers, only because you're going to see that there is variance with the person actually testing and pinching. And if like with the tool I use, like it's like $20, there's a pretty big discrepancy depending on how much I actually pinch from my stomach. So, I mean, like this is where I've had, like in the past, I've had boyfriends like, oh yeah, here, you do this for me because it's a little bit easier. But in reality, they might not be pinching to the same degree that I am. They might be pinching harder. They might be pulling harder. It also is something that can be largely affected by fluid status. So whenever I, have really hard sessions, I know that if I take my calipers the next day, largely specific to the muscle group that I worked. So if I worked my lower body, my glutes, my legs, they're going to be more inflamed. There's going to be more water on my frame, and that can manifest as more pinchable fat. So I'll say that this is one that I am a fan of, but not necessarily to the extent that I'm plugging it in to get a percentage, but rather I'm just getting like a gross sum of the pinchable fat in millimeters. So for me, I do serratus, belly button, lower back, upper glute, lower glute. And I actually do multiple points on my legs because that's where I carry a lot of my fat. And I do the inside, like my adductor. I do upper where my adductor is, or I guess like the thickest. Yeah, I should say that the thickest part of my adductor is like the widest part. I also do the circumference there. So I'm measuring both size in diameter, as not really diameter, circumference, but size, as well as pinchable fat, just to get an idea of if that's growing. Same thing with mid thigh. And then I carry a lot of fat right around my knees because I have negative quads, or at least at one point I did, maybe not so much now. And it's nice because now I can get this collective idea of if weight's going up, if it's going down, where it's coming from. So again, like just to stress this, like if you're going to do it at a gym or have someone else do it, or you're going to do it yourself and follow like a 6-point read, because it's essentially you're using a formula that has anywhere from like 3 to like 11 points. And then it's spitting out a percentage. Now, this isn't going to measure visceral fat, which is the fat kind of in and around in your organs, which the DEXA will. So I thought that was helpful too, because especially if we're looking at waist size, if you're someone who's like, hey, I think that this is mostly fat and not actually bloat. I think I'm just like a little squishier, a little fatter in areas that are non-subcutaneous. This would help you differentiate that. But I think largely like calipers alongside DEXA, that could be a really nice, like harmonious blend of generally measuring the areas that fat is accumulating or coming off of. But the skill of the technician is huge. If you are working with someone, I would work with the same person if you're going to a facility or if you're going to your gym and then you have a single trainer. Don't rotate trainers. I've done that before with calipers, and like that just adds another layer to this. Site selection needs to be consistent each and every time. So I have like little moles or birthmarks or just like general notations around like, okay, like on my belly button, like there are 4 quadrants. I'm going to use the upper right side because that is what I've been using thus far. So if I switch to a side of my body that I carry more fat, or I don't know, like the interesting thing is on the DEXA, I was able to see like I've injured my right leg, I've rehabbed it, and now it has more muscle and less fat. Whereas my left leg, less muscle, more fat, but they weigh almost the same. It's just different structural composition. So that would be like something to consider in the case you're doing calipers. If you're pinching different parts of, let's say, your left leg versus your right leg, and you're like me, where you have that kind of asymmetry. But what I like about the calipers is it's low cost. You can do it weekly or monthly. A lot of my athletes, like they want to do it, and they kind of run into like very common issues with like not having a good landing site, not knowing like, what changes they should be seeing. So then they think they're doing it wrong. So then they take pinches until they see a difference, which I don't recommend. But I think if you're a competitor, you can note your personal pinch readings at your fattest and at your leanest. And I've done this like at the start of my prep in 22. I don't think I did it before then, but it was really enlightening to see like how much I shrunk down to. and then how much I got up to in my off seasons. And now being back in prep, having done a few fat loss phases, I can kind of trend that and be like, okay, so last summer I didn't get stage lean, but I got pretty close. And then here are the circumferences, pairing that with measurements that increased. So now another one that I'm going to go in on is the BIA, the bioelectrical impedance analysis. This can be found in home scales, handhelds at the gym or at a supplement store. It sends basically mild electrical currents through your body. Now, lean mass conducts electricity better than fat, but we have to understand that like these can be highly inaccurate, and like some studies show like there's a 4% to 5% swing, and that's not necessarily uncommon. To me, I think that's kind of bullshit. I think there could be even more of a variance here. Another blind spot to this one is like it doesn't distinguish again between subcutaneous versus visceral fat. So specifically for someone who's trying to use this to indicate overall health status. Now also it's very sensitive to hydration. So that's where I think like the swing is, or the variance in like the actual read could be much more than 5%. Like, listen, like I've had people take laxatives, take diuretics prior to doing their body fat read. And I'm just like, yo, like this is not helpful in what we're trying to do. Okay. Like we need an accurate representation. We don't need to be like fully cleansing ourselves or dehydrating ourselves. Like I don't need to go sweat in the sauna before you do this. Like that's not really useful information. Now, even if we're looking at like at-home scales, these can be affected by any like body sweat. So any kind of perspiration, even sweaty feet. Now, that's just something I would keep in mind if you're using a body fat scale or a scale that like, will send you your body fat and track it. Like just understand that those can fluctuate pretty heavily, and drinking less water, drinking more water, having more sodium, not using the bathroom, eating a big meal, that can raise or lower body fat percentage pretty drastically in terms of how this method is reading it. So if you haven't seen my video on weight fluctuations and you're interested in understanding like what things affect hydration status and scale weight fluctuations, I would highly recommend going and checking that one out. I think it's important. I think it's important to have context, and I would say like a really clear understanding around when these things can be used. And frankly, when it comes to the bioelectrical forms of body fat measurements, I just don't think that there's a big place for them, because oftentimes I find people getting really discouraged when these methods like fluctuate pretty heavily, which they can do often. Now, what about an MRI or a CT? Yeah, no, I'm going to do this segment. That is a high resolution imaging, and it's typically used like completely as needed in research, in specialized like medical context. And it is extremely precise, and it can pinpoint exactly where and how fat is stored, but it is very expensive and typically not something you're going to get an order for. It's time consuming. It's overkill for routine checks. And frankly, I don't necessarily quite understand like how this is a method that we would apply here, just given that like the accessibility is going to be so low. I think in terms of like physiologically and like making changes to our physiques, I think the cost, the facility access, I think those are major barriers. But that is technically something that we could say is lumped into a metric in how we're measuring composition. Now, I already said, if you want to know more about what factors influence scale weight fluctuations, definitely watch that video. But in terms of all these methods and the blind spots, you have to understand that no method is completely flawless. The key pitfalls are going to be hydration status. So specifically if you are dehydrated or if you're experiencing fluid overload, if you're having edema, so like actual water retention that can be pretty excessive and pretty common. We see that after show for a lot of people, especially those who use diuretics. That can throw off, I mean, pretty much all these, but specifically the bioelectrical impedance one, as well as the DEXA, that can definitely vary it. GI motility, which I already kind of talked about, but it's this, for those who I'm just trying to say, it's a fancy way to say like, hey, like how often are you going to the bathroom? What are your bowel movement regularities like? The quality of that, I'm not going to ask you for a Bristol stool scale. That's like none of my business. But motility in terms of like gastrointestinally, that is the coordinated movement of fluids, liquids, waste through the GI tract. Now, slower or faster transit times, that can absolutely throw off all these methods. It's not to say don't get the DEXA if you didn't poop that morning, but at the same time, make a note of it. Just be like, oh, I didn't go to the bathroom. And that's a big reason I have all my clients like on their form. It's not to be invasive. I'm just like, did you or did you not use the bathroom this morning? And if you took your scale weight and pictures prior to, just make a note of that just so we know. Next, meal timing. Eating a big meal pre-test can actually like completely change the water distribution and even like just the volume. And that's again going to be across the board, even with the calipers. So just keep that in mind. Like we want these to be very consistent assessments. Exercise, sweating. I know some of y'all have like really busy schedules. So it's like, okay, like finding the time to do this, it might be a pain in the dick, but realistically, like I would try to do it the same day. Like if you train legs on Monday and you know, like, okay, I can only go Tuesdays, cool. Like try to make that as consistent moving forward whenever you get these tests done again. And let's say you go on a Wednesday and you're also training legs like I do, and you had an upper body day Tuesday, or Tuesday you didn't do anything, like you just did cardio. Just make a note of it so that like we can then use that information to extrapolate what changes were made and whether or not there's a different reason than just simply you gained or lost fat or muscle. I'm not a big fan of getting these done post-workout, post-sauna, blood flow, and even just fluid shifts throughout the body that can absolutely alter readings. So then we're looking at some of these different forms, like I guess really all the forms, DEXA, BOD POD, hydrostatic weighing. We have to look at like the technician who's like push and go and like lining you up where you need to be or giving you instructions. But even for calipers, like user skill is everything. So we should consider this. And like personally for me, I can tell you like I've taken calipers the same way every single time. I've pinched the same way every single time. And if I get a reading that like seems wildly off and I'm not like, oh yeah, you had a lot of sodium yesterday or you had a really hard workout, I might just retest again. And there are very much times where I'm like, oh yeah, okay, this makes a little more sense. Like maybe I was like slightly off in terms of the location that I was pinching. Now, also machine calibration with any of these machines, even like the electronic forms for calipers, which I don't think I like went into depth on. I'm not a fan of because you actually have to close it with your hands. And I think that oftentimes, like to me, I'm like, there's a big difference between closing slowly and using a specific amount of pressure and then just closing as tightly as possible, which is why I like more of the analog spring-loaded caliper tool, skin sight pinchable tool, because it's consistent each and every time. And obviously wear and tear, sure, but whatever. That to me, like I can make peace with and be like, okay, this is probably as close to as accurate as I can get it. Realistically, it's most important that you remain consistent. So same time of day, similar hydration status, fasted if possible, same device or method each time. And if you're using different methods, still like try to keep everything as constant as you can, knowing that there's likely going to be a variance. I remember I did the BOD POD and the DEXA and the calipers all within a few hours of each other back in college when I first started competing, and I got 11, 12% and 15%. Not in that order. I think it was the opposite order, actually. I think calipers were the lowest. And I think BOD POD was 15 and DEXA was 12. And I remember being like, oh, how can this all be true? And it just comes down to variance in the actual methodology you're using. And really just to drive this home, the time of day, super important. If you slept like shit, if you got no sleep last night and you're rolling up to the DEXA, like I can tell you, I got up super early this morning to do the first podcast, and like it was like immediate, get out of bed, got to be ready here in like an hour and a half. My eyes were puffy. Like it was a little bit earlier than I typically wake up at. Went to bed a little bit later because I had, hair and shit. And I had to wash it and do girl things. And I'm like, okay, well, I'm only going to get 7 hours of sleep, like 7 hours 7 hours time in bed. Realistically, I'm going to wake up a couple times. I'm going to go pee. I'm probably not going to be in deep sleep as long as I normally would. So we can project that I'm probably going to wake up with a little more fluid on me today. And what do you know? Woke up earlier, didn't get as much sleep, a lot on my mind. So I'm like, okay, this makes sense. And if I were going to get a BOD pod or a DEXA done today, that would be a note I would kind of just annotate like to the side, be like, yeah, like I didn't get the best night's sleep. Now, if you get no sleep, like that's going to be a huge stressor on your body. So honestly, I would just consider rescheduling if you can. But late afternoon, evening, like you're going to probably see fluid shifts, especially in women, especially individuals who experience more fluctuations, relative to a menstrual cycle, which that's also something that you just need to consider if you're having one of your PMS days, like I was when I got my DEXA. If you have the ability to reschedule, I definitely would. I wouldn't try to schedule it at a point in your cycle where there's a lot of volatility, emotionally or physiologically. Now, the other thing, sodium and carbs. Now, I've said this 1,000 times. I'm going to keep saying it. 1 gram of carb is going to hold 3 to 4 grams of water. It's going to pull it into your system. It's going to pull it into your muscles. This is something we need to consider when we have someone getting DEXAs done, when we have really any of these methods, actually, we just need to consider, are they carb cycling? And to the degree that we're carb cycling, is this detrimental on account of seeing that swing in fluid shift that is strictly driven by carbs? So even if you kept sodium and water the same, if you went from 50 grams of carbs to 200 grams of carbs, that's a 150 gram difference. There's 450 grams about in a pound. It's like 460, I think. So this very much could show up on the scale differently. So just consider this if you're carb cycling. Again, getting it done on the same low day or the same day that basically you got the previous one done. So whether that's a low day or a high day, or just not fucking carb cycling, because I don't really believe in that. Now, I think building a consistent measurement routine, if you love DEXA, plan a scan. I mean, if you're in a fat loss phase, you could very well get this done every 4 to 6 weeks. That's what I will be doing because I really enjoyed the process and I'm kind of interested to see now that we have a starting point. We have a before photo for the DEXA. We can compare that to where I get down to as I continue to go through my prep. I'm also going to continue taking calipers though, because I think that's invaluable at this point, and I have so much data already backlogged. Now, I'd be careful with like the at-home scale, the bioelectrical ones. They're just not built very well. And like you can end up paying a lot of money for these devices that are designed very poorly. Ultimately, just make sure you do it in a consistent manner. Test at the same time, preferably in the morning with the same hydration state, minimal clothes, and if possible, fasted. Now, it's important to track trends. So if you are doing this too frequently, or if you're doing this with a lot, I don't know, going on in your life that would lead to imbalances or muddied data. Like I talk about muddied data a lot, like artificial inflations on the scale weight. And that's where body fat can be a little eye-opening. But we also have to consider that there are ways that body fat can also be muddied and artificially inflated or reduced. So in the case that you used a lot of Miralax before you went to your DEXA and like you gave yourself a full like colonoscopy prep, cool, but that is not going to give us an accurate read. You are going to come in lighter and lower. And I honestly don't know what it's going to do in terms of like affecting your lean body mass read, because realistically, like we're going to see a discrepancy there unless you do that every single time, which I do not recommend. And I say this only because I've had people literally do the Miralax, do the dandelion root, do expel the night before, just like so that they see that lower number. And I'm like, oh, honey, like don't, just this kind of defeats the whole purpose. So we need accurate information. And ultimately, like we need to see that trend down. That will help us discern like what kind of deficit you're in, which we should be able to make projections even prior to seeing the DEXA. So we should be close to what we think. And I'll say typically, whenever I see big changes in lean body mass, it's not necessarily that the individual lost muscle or gained muscle. It usually is dependent, I mean, like on all the variables that I've kind of already discussed, but then like the region in which that lean body mass came off of. So on a DEXA, they kind of like highlight for you legs. I think it's gynoid. I know they do like trunk and then arms. And if you're someone who's like, okay, I'm finding that the lean body mass in my trunk is significantly going down. Well, couldn't it, or even like gynoid, like couldn't that be potentially indicative of a change in GI weight? Like potentially you weren't digesting food at the same rate as you were the previous time, which is like, it's autonomic, like it's going to happen outside of your control. It's not something to stress about. And we're really talking about like maybe a pound or two. So like, just keep that in mind. I had a client who, 48% body fat when we started. She's down several pounds now, and she's getting the scans every few weeks. And that was one of the conversations we had, because like, first and foremost, she was like, I went from not tracking to tracking. And she saw a decrease in lean body mass, which Jordan's her trainer. So I know that's not possible because she's doing everything supremely. And I remember like walking her through and kind of coaching her on like, hey, like, remember how you were eating not necessarily high volume foods, but foods that just sat with you longer. They're processed and just like not as healthy for you. And then you went to tracking. We lowered overall like food intake by like quite a bit. And we were able to see that scale weight went down. You're moving more weight in your training sessions, so training performance is going up. Although like lean body mass says it's technically down, it's only showing that it's down in the trunk region. So I would assume that's more like GI weight and actual inflammation, even visceral fat, not necessarily, well, I guess in the case of lean body mass is down, that wouldn't be visceral fat. But point being, what I explained, it was like, if we look at region by region, we can see that your lean body mass in your arms and your legs is actually up. It's just that big of a discrepancy that your net loss of lean body mass is greater. So that almost lends me to think like, hey, this probably is not actually lean mass or fat-free mass. I think that's the term. It's probably something else. Now, the other thing we want to consider is in the case that someone is losing muscle, they will look worse. You will look shittier. You will look fatter, because by like simple equations, like if you have 100 pounds of lean body mass and 40 pounds of fat, and now you lose, I don't know, let's just for simple math, you go down to 90 pounds of lean body mass, but you know, your fat is roughly still the same. Your body fat percentage is technically higher. You will look worse. You won't look leaner. So that's where we also have to weigh these body fat measurements against pictures. And I also like to weigh them against measurements and scale weight. If we're having someone who's losing at roughly 1 pound a week, it's a 500 calorie deficit. That's pretty easy to maintain muscle at that point. For most healthy people, that's a different conversation if this person's in a 1,500 calorie deficit a day who's losing, let's say, 2 to 2.5 pounds a week. That individual who's losing at that kind of rate of change, I'm going to be more inclined to think they are losing muscle. So that's where, from a coaching standpoint, I kind of reverse engineer it and build a case for why you would be losing muscle or why you wouldn't, especially in these settings where it does show a discrepancy in lean mass. I think the DEXA is a great option if you can afford it. Occasionally, it is a good snapshot. Don't get fucking weird with it. Don't be like, hey, every week I need to go get it done and I have this whole ritual beforehand. Just like I was that lunatic who like truly just made such a big deal about seeing that number lower and lower, kind of losing sight of like, why does this actually matter? And I do think in the case of individuals who are looking to check for bone density, so especially females who've been competing a long time, we got to get ahead of osteopenia. And we really should be making sure that our resistance training is putting us in a position to age, I would say, like gracefully, but in a way that supports us from not experiencing often or frequent falls. Now, let's say you have someone who is using steroids, and no, not the fun kind, the kind that really wreak havoc on your body. And they can also like impact bone density. So that's something we need to be aware of. Then yeah, like these scans could be really useful in helping that individual know like what kind of impact is this actually having. But I think the BOD pod, like honestly, if I had access to it, which maybe I'll check Santa Clara and see if they have, one's accessible to the public for a reasonable rate. That'd be kind of cool to compare. If you have access to it and it's no sweat off your back, if it truly is like, just like how it was for me in college, where it's like quick, it's a very low fee and it's accessible, amazing, but it does lack DEXA's regional breakdown. that's my only stink. The hydrostatic, I just don't think it's practical. MRIs, I don't think is practical. Skin fold calipers, I think are great in conjunction with DEXAs and scale weight. Bioelectrical impedance analyses, I don't really see a place for them. I think it's a really like salesy way for a supplement shop or gym to upsell you and put you in a position where you think that they have the ability to help you lose body fat, when in reality, like, it's just kind of gimmicky. But it is easy in terms of an at-home approach, but for general trend tracking for you guys who I would say like want a little bit more, just watch out for those day-to-day fluid fluctuations. Now, whether you are a competitor or fitness enthusiast, I think measuring body fat, that can be helpful, but I stress this so much. Do not get weird about it. I have clients that it like ruins their day. They get their DEXA and like they get the report back and they are like pissed because they're like, it says I lost muscle. And I'm like, no, you just didn't poop last time and now you did. And like, it's literally that simple. Like it's not because you're doing anything wrong. Like, I can tell you you're in a build. Like, what are you talking about? And that's where I just want to caution you. Like, I've had bad relationships with body fat and scale weight and body image, I would say still now. But I've had like really unhealthy and like very OCD like relationships with these things before. So it's not something I would like stress about. And I would try to just like keep at arm's length, like use it when appropriate, use it with medical supervision or coach supervision, because oftentimes I find so many people, they will get these reports kind of like lab work and they'll be like, well, this one's out of range or this one's low and it's in range. And it's like, they don't really have the tools and the formal background to help make sense of a scan or a report in this case. So that's where I oftentimes find myself like helping clarify and educating on like what these changes mean. That's definitely something I do in a one-time consultation. If you're interested in that, info for that can be found in the show notes below. But all in all, measuring body fat accurately, it doesn't have to be that complicated. I think for most of us, DEXAs and calipers is going to be the way that I lean. But whatever method you pick, consistency is everything. Same environment, same routine, same approach each time. This is going to help you reduce those potential artificial spikes in muddied up data. But all in all, I hope this was helpful. I hope this gives you some direction and some clarity around these different methods. If you enjoyed this video, and if you have any pushback or any forms that I don't know about, please let me know in the comments below. As always, thank you guys for watching. I will see you in the next one.